We have our panel still with us here, Kevin Madden, A.B. Stoddard, and Molly Ball. Kevin, if I could begin with you, a number of appointments today. Michael Flynn, Jeff Sessions, Pompeo, some fairly hardline positions here we're talking about. And yet this weekend, he's meeting with your old boss, Mitt Romney, there. Do you take that as a sign that he is expanding the field a little bit, looking to moderate the overall tenor of the administration?
Potentially. I think there are a lot of policy professionals that are reluctant to really join a Trump administration because they think that maybe they're not open to a new line of thinking. This could send a signal to those policy professionals that they are open to hearing from people who have, a more pragmatic or a much more or more moderate voice on some issues like national security or foreign policy.
Hearing from is one thing.
Right.
Do you believe that Mitt Romney is actually a serious contender for Secretary of State?
I don't know. I mean, I'm not well connected enough with the transition to speak to that. But what I do know is that Governor Romney does take these issues very seriously. And they do have a previous relationship. Granted, he has been a very strong critic. But I think the Trump transition team and Trump himself knows that Mitt Romney cares about these issues, knows about these issues. So if they do show a willingness to listen to them, I think Mitt Romney will share insights that he thinks are important.
But would he take the job? Would he take the job if he was offered it?
And I think this. I'll say this. I think Mitt Romney's sense of duty is very, very strong, and the belief, and I think I think it could allay some of the concerns that people have that there aren't enough people in there, people with strong ideas that will challenge Trump on things like national security and foreign policy. So that sense of duty is going. I think it's what's guiding Romney to have the meeting, and I think that sense of duty would guide any decision where they're in office.
Okay, A.B. Molly, I had to pepper the Romney guy there a little bit on those questions, but let's look, and I want your thoughts on these selections as a whole, because it's not just the personalities we're talking about here. We're talking about some pretty hardcore positions. I mean, look at Flynn's positions on Islam, on Russia, Pompeo on torture, Sessions, at least in the past, on voting rights. Do you look at the Molly Ball as a sign that he's going to stick to this right path, not a correct path, but far right path?
I think there are actually a lot of conflicting signals here. I think it would be a mistake to lump in someone like Mike Pompeo, who is a very conservative but pretty regular Republican, with people like Flynn and Sessions, who are much more unorthodox, who I don't think would have a place in any Republican administration other than that of Donald Trump. Right now, there is a battle for the soul of the Donald Trump administration, and nobody knows what it is going to look like. Is it going to look like the alt-right populist nationalist vision of Steve Bannon, or is it going to look like the kind of Republican administration that Reince Priebus would like to preside over, that is stocked with much more traditional names? We have no idea. I think, as Kevin was saying, if they choose to listen to someone like Mitt Romney, that would be reassuring to a lot of people on the right and the left, not only in terms of his expertise, but because of the signal of magnanimity that it would send. It would send the signal that Donald Trump wants to put the good of the country above his personal grudges against people. And that is something that a lot of Republicans I talk to are not yet convinced of.
A.B., if you could listen to this, because The Hollywood Reporter just published an interview with Steve Bannon, the newly minted, of course, White House chief strategist for the Trump administration. And I have to be honest, reading this, it is a doozy. Let's have a listen. Actually, it's not on tape. We're going to read it. He likens his power in this interview and his sway over the president-elect to Thomas Cromwell in the court of the Tudors. He dubs the Trump victory the dawn of an entirely new political movement. Later in the interview, he says that darkness is good. Dick Cheney, Darth Vader, Satan, that's power. You listen to these kinds of statements here. That's not exactly morning in America.
No, and we all read that he said that he's pushing $1 trillion infrastructure plan that will make conservatives on the Hill make their hair fall out, because no one knows how Trump is going to pay for it. Every single thing that Trump is proposing adds to the deficit. Not one of them helps us get at the debt at all. It's all roads and bridges and VA hospitals and walls and tax cuts and new military spending and this infrastructure. So that part of it is interesting. But the other thing is, what you know from this interview is it just sort of cements the vision of Bannon as this visionary movement leader. And he is the one that makes Trump feel wonderful. Everyone else comes in and says, could you just get into this square peg and say this way and get back on the teleprompter? Steve Bannon, when people say, do you think he'll be gone because he's getting so much criticism by January? No way. Steve Bannon is going to be the most powerful voice in his ear. He was on the press release on top of Reince Priebus for a reason. And he thinks he's telling Donald Trump, you're changing the course of history, and he is going to be the most influential person there.
We do have Steve Bannon on tape talking about this $1 trillion infrastructure plan. Have a listen. It's not on tape. I'm going to read it. It says here to go to the tape, but I'm going to read it. I'm the guy pushing $1 trillion infrastructure plan with negative interest rates throughout the world. It's the greatest opportunity to rebuild everything, shipyards, ironworks, get them all jacked up. We're just going to throw it up against the wall and see if it sticks. Under a Democratic administration, you might hear some Republicans calling this stimulus and how are you going to pay for it? And yet,
well, you do have a lot of Republicans saying that. We have had both Paul Ryan and Mitch McConnell say this is not something that they are interested in because it isn't a traditional Republican platform. On the other hand, it is music to the ears of a lot of Democrats. There are a lot of Democrats who would love to go along with the kind of thing that they have been proposing for years. You know, as A.B. was saying, Steve Bannon is the ideological core of Donald Trump. Donald Trump is not a very ideological person. He's certainly not a philosopher or a theorist of politics. Bannon is, and Bannon wants Trump to be the leader of a movement that is not Republican and not Democrat, but a radically new kind of populism. And the question will be, when he runs into a wall in the Congress, when his own party says,